Medicinal Marijuana Task Force. Thank you for your time and for being here tonight. As I start, Nicole Schultz is actually going to pass out a slightly revised testimony with some additional information on the back, which I hope is all right. My name is Melissa Durkee, and I'm here to speak on behalf of my son, Noah. He's 15 years old. He suffers from several disabling disorders, including Tourette syndrome and OCD. Noah is what many doctors have deemed treatment resistant. Similar to, as Nicole Schultz spoke about, her daughter Lucy, tries a lot of drugs, they do not work, they do not provide benefit. Noah also falls into that category. His body does not respond in the typical way to the conventional medications that are supposed to help his conditions. Since he was first diagnosed at 8, Noah has tried over 15 different medications. These include antidepressants and antipsychotics, several of which are not FDA approved for use in children and do not have research on the long-term effects of the growing brain and body. He has endured IVIG infusions, constant blood draws, and a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. He takes 14 pills each morning, 6 each evening, and gives himself a daily growth hormone shot. He has suffered side effects from his medications, including stunted growth, extreme weight gain, intense and daily abdominal pain, and psychotic episodes that require inpatient stabilization. Regardless of the first-line Tourette syndrome medications and everything available after them, his system is still wrecked on a daily basis. His tics are exhausting and debilitating, and they take the form of extreme profanity, racial slurs, and intense volume that cannot be controlled. Because of this, he cannot attend school regularly, cannot go to the movies, rarely to a restaurant, or even join our family for church. With each new medication, we've asked him to place his trust in us and in his doctors that we will do something to find him relief. And I can guarantee you, we have tried just about everything. And in our continued research, we keep coming back to one thing, and that is cannabis. It is helping the patients with Noah's profile to find relief from these muscle spasms, these tics, and the OCD behaviors that control them. Cannabis reduces tics in a manner similar to how it helps other dystonia-inducing conditions, such as Parkinson's. And when I say cannabis, I'm not speaking just the cannabinoids. All cannabinoids, including the whole plant, including the THC, are what my son Noah will ultimately need for health. For Noah, a dose of medical marijuana 3 times a day could reduce his tics and stabilize his OCD enough for him to actually make it through a school day. It could help his sleep disturbances because he tics throughout the night, and it could calm his brain enough to let his body get a break from this incessant activity. Cannabis does not come with the same heart-wrenching warnings as many of the other medications he is on. These include risk of depression, cognitive dulling, obesity, diabetes, stroke, respiratory problems, delusional thinking, and psychosis. Other side effects: fatigue, insomnia, muscle rigidity, school phobias, irritability, headache, hypertension, loss of appetite, and ironically, the risk of increased tics. These are just some of the side effects from the medications he has been prescribed, and I can guarantee you that cannabis risks none of these adverse side effects. And as you've heard several times, there is no record of a lethal dose associated with cannabis. I cannot say that about a single other medication he has taken in his 15 years. In 1988, DEA Administrative Law Judge Francis L. Young was asked to rule on the dangers of marijuana. In his findings of fact, research and submitted to the DEA at their request, he ruled that, quote, marijuana in its natural form is one of the safest therapeutically active substances known. It would be unreasonable, arbitrary, and capricious for the DEA to continue to stand between those sufferers and the benefits of this substance. This was 28 years ago, and we've yet to have access to this whole plant. I have attached the critical point of his ruling to my most recent testimony, and I hope you will review it for a clearer sense of cannabis's LD50 and therapeutic ratio, both which are common ways to determine drug safety, and it is very clear in his findings that cannabis is very safe. It is a horrible feeling to watch your child spend his days in a loud, tangled mess of illness and despair, wondering what as parents we can do. Before we embark on any treatment for Noah, we research. And we've researched enough to believe that cannabis can help him, along with thousands of other patients in Ohio. We are not asking for access lightly. We understand this is a controversial issue. We are not pressing for a program to fully legalize recreational marijuana. If recreational cannabis is what we wanted for our son, we could get that. Marijuana is abundantly available throughout Ohio. He can tell me exactly where I can get it and who I can get it from, but that is not what he needs. What he needs is very different. He needs a well-defined, properly regulated system that allows for legal access. This is legislation that we sincerely hope will come from our lawmakers. We're asking you to make a balanced, legitimate, sincere consideration based on the facts, and they are abundant, that when used appropriately, cannabis has an undeniable medical benefit. There is overwhelming evidence that it does have high medicinal value and that the side effects of cannabis are not anywhere near as detrimental as so many medications that are currently available. There is abundant evidence coming out of the legal states that shows us what is working and what is not, both legally and medically. As a parent of a chronically ill child, it is devastating to hear these testimonies and see the research that shows the true success of cannabis, yet not be able to offer this to our son. We are in close contact with patients, doctors, and medical professionals in legal states who are using cannabis to treat these conditions, and it is working. The toll those conditions take on the human spirit cannot be underestimated. I'm here because we will not lose my son to cancer. We will not lose him to a seizure. We will ultimately lose him to suicide because of the depression and the loss of hope for everything we have tried medically that has been approved for him. We are asking for access to this plant that could without a doubt offer our own son and many others a better quality of life. We are asking you to take this seriously and to help us in this endeavor. Otherwise, consider the consequences of what happens if we continue to keep access away from those who have exhausted all other options. Again, this is not recreational marijuana. It is medicinal, and there are many ways to determine what makes it medicinal. I thank you for the opportunity to share our story, to speak with you today, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
I just have just one question. Thank you. And how have you, Noah's 15?
He is 15, yes.
Yeah, so as a parent, again, how have you been dealing with this for 15 years in the state of Ohio?
Very difficult. We've traveled to Colorado, we've traveled to Washington in the past 2 years to research these different options because the medications that he has trialed simply haven't worked for him. He has 2 genetic mutations that we know from gene testing, and they will continue not to work for him. Things that are on the market now, we are on our 8th round of an antidepressant, antipsychotics, that they hope that his system can tolerate, will help with some of the OCD and the Tourette syndromes. Before being put on this medication, he had to undergo an EKG to make sure that his heart could handle it. You talk to patients out in the legal states, and they can tell you exactly what someone with Noah's profile will need. He will ultimately need to vaporize a high CBD blend with a high THC content at 17.9%. Like, they know these things. It is being researched, it is being identified as what helps, what does not help, and it truly can be identified in a clinical manner to provide medical benefit.
Thank you.
Yes, and if I could, I'm sorry, any more questions?
Sure, what were you going to say? Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to speak, let's see. Mrs. Montgomery has stepped out, but she did have a question.
She's right here.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Just the question about how it is, and I know Dr. Sicily spoke to much of this about how it works in several legal states. And our experience with it is when the families move out of state, or families who are already in a legal state need access, they go to a doctor that has some sort of certification. There are CMEs, the Certified Medical Education, to provide more information on how to dose, how to recommend, what different strains to use for different ailments. Those doctors then recommend what would be best for the specific ailment. They have to apply for a card. Those cards are then accepted at the different dispensaries and then also required for lab testing. And I do think that's an important point, that not a free-for-all of go you don't purchase cannabis on the street and smoke it.
Yes, sir.
I'm curious about something. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've been told specifically what it would take to be able to deal with what is wrong with no?
We know.
And how did that come about? And specifically, because I think those are some of the things that would really be very important to all of us to understand how you got that and that actually exists.
Absolutely. There are medical cannabis consultants in the legal states who work with doctors who chart, who keep very stringent records of the different strains and the different balances between CBD and THC for the different ailments. And so that's who we work with. We work with somebody out there, and we know that if we are able to gain access for Noah, for Tourette's, he would need a high CBD balance in addition to a high THC. Often epileptic patients, they're finding that as well. High CBD might have some success, but then later, as the seizures present themselves, THC, it's inevitable that it needs to be added to help break down those seizures. And so that is how we came to that. My son is also, he's an ambassador for the National Tourette's Association, and therefore we have a network of Tourette's families around the country, many in legal states, and this is what they are utilizing after all of the failed pharmaceuticals.
Thank you.
Sheriff, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, commend you for your strength and for coming here tonight to express your concerns to this task force. We appreciate it. Just very quickly, on the studies that you've seen, traveling out of state, the dispensaries, I think is what you call it. As a follow-up to General Montgomery's question earlier, how are those regulated? Are you aware of how those are regulated? Are they private, are they public?
I do not want to misspeak on how that regulation happens. I do know in the state of Washington, for instance, there are a specific number of licenses that are granted. I believe it's the same thing in Colorado, a specific number of recreational licenses and a specific number of dispensary licenses. For the dispensary license, in order to purchase from a dispensary, you must have your green card. In order to get your green card, you must have a recommendation, a specific letter with your doctor's signature recommending why this would be beneficial to you. The reason there is the division in Colorado and Washington with a dispensary green card versus a non is because it's medicinal and recreational. The dispensaries are not taxed, whereas the recreational stores are. And so that savings is passed on to the patients who are buying through a dispensary. The dispensaries also have required lab testing, certifiable lab testing, so that when you enter a dispensary, you will know that this specific medicine that you are buying has been tested not to have mold, not to have solvents, not to have anything that may or may not work with your child or patient's system, because those are all very important.
And just to clarify, because I'm very dumb about it, are they seeing a doctor who are giving them a prescription to go to the dispensary, or are they going to the dispensary?
Yes, they are seeing doctors who are giving recommendations. Because it is not an FDA-approved drug, they are not allowed to quote prescribe it. It can only be a recommendation.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your testimony.